Hey, good morning, Neurofeedback moms. This is going to be a little bit longer of a presentation, a little bit more formal of a presentation about what is neurofeedback. When it is done, this recording will always be available in the feed in the group, but I'm also going to put it in the units under the nuts and bolts of neurofeedback. So please, 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 if you have questions, throw them in the comments below. I'll be checking on those throughout the presentation. And I'll answer those as I can, but do not hesitate to throw those questions out during the presentation, after the presentation, whatever, but during is totally fine. What else? You'll be able to find this recording in the units. And I think that's it. Thanks so much for tuning in, for listening, and hopefully this will be helpful to you. So I'm going to switch to share my screen and get started. All right, what is neurofeedback? And that wasn't supposed to happen. There we go. Sorry, give me a sec here. Okay, now I got it. I just had to get control. Okay, what is neurofeedback? So to start, I'd like to tell a story of a mom who needed help one dark and dreary night. A mom drove her car up a narrow mountain road, which was icy, and she lost control. But thankfully, she was thrown from the car, clear of the car, but found herself hanging by a branch over the side of a mountain. And she began to cry out for help. Help! Is there anyone up there? And she was surprised when she heard a booming voice from the sky call back and say, "Yes, my child, I am here. Do you trust me?" And the mom cried back, "Yes, yes, I trust you. Can you help me?" And the booming voice from the sky said, "Let go of the branch, and I will catch you before you hit the rocks below." And there was a silence. And the mom called back, "Is there anyone else up there?" And I think this is how a lot of us feel when we are in pain, or when one of our kids are in pain. We don't know how to help them. We've tried everything we know, and we just can't seem to get the help that we need, or that gets us to that next level of healing. And this is where my family and I started out with neurofeedback. To grossly oversimplify, I had more bad days than good. I would be going along in my day and just would be hit with extraordinary fatigue. And every day was just a struggle to get through. I have a particular chronic illness, which I've talked a little bit about in the group, but just something that just takes over. And I know a lot of you can relate to that. My youngest also in particular had a lot of challenges. So she's got several diagnoses: ADHD, dyslexia, anxiety. We believe she's on the spectrum. She was failure to thrive as an infant. We tried so many things. Poor thing. And I tried so many things to help me. One of the things we tried, this is not a picture of her, by the way, but it illustrates one of the things. One of the things we did was we got a compound pharmacy. We got her on a bunch of supplements and so on, but she couldn't swallow pills. So we put them into lollipops or candy, and this is a good representation of about how well that went. So we were pretty stuck, and then we discovered neurofeedback a few years ago, and that is her there on the bottom there, and I'm on the top. So the way we went about it was we decided to do a rental. We actually rented the equipment and did it at home. For us, it was much more affordable. I called around town. The lowest I could find was $2,500 for one family member. The going rate, though, more common in where I live, is $5,000 to $8,000. I get calls regularly from people who are quoted that for one family member. And we were able to rent the equipment and do it at home for less than $1,000. So it was the best option for us. And so everybody had sessions, and but it was my daughter and I in particular who really had a very powerful result. So after my 6th session, I woke up feeling rested, probably for the first time in 20 years. And the cascade from there was profound. So I had less anxiety. I had joy in my life again. Breathing was regulated in ways that it wasn't before. I had energy, and it turned where I have more good days than bad, by far. And I continue my neurofeedback training to this day, and it continues to really impact me powerfully, and that's for another presentation. Anyway, this one here had about 10 sessions. We did this over the summer. She had about 10 sessions, and that's not the norm, by the way. Most people seem to need quite a bit more, but in her first 10 sessions, she had a pretty significant turnaround. She went from moody, sullen, very averse to affection, to extremely affectionate, joyful, self-motivated. She started cleaning her room. And I know there are moms in the group who had that happen as well. And it's just, it's mind-blowing when it starts to happen at your house. And that was over the summer, and then school started, and she had become a very different student. She was organized. Normally homework was, 2 hours for 30 minutes worth of homework and just extreme frustration. She just could not get to the level she wanted to. And after these 10 sessions, she really started performing. She went from a C, D, and F student to an A student, A, B student. And it's really nice. Now, that was 3 or 4 years ago, and, it's mom bringing this neurofeedback in, and we don't want to do it. But she, in the last 4 months or so, has started asking for sessions and absolutely loves them. So, and I've also posted a little bit about what's going on with her too, here and there. But so it was just a major turnaround for my family. And so I started whole family neurofeedback. So there's that. Let's see where we go. I'm going to check real quick and see if any questions popped in. If I can. All right. I don't see anything, and I'm not exactly sure how to do it. I thought I could. All right. I'll just have to look at questions afterwards, but definitely throw in your questions if you have them. Okay. So one of the other benefits is, this is my father. One of the other benefits of having this equipment is that I get to help my parents, my sisters, we all love doing the neurofeedback. So I asked this question, and this is just something to settle in and think with, reflect on. What are your barriers to wellness? So, is there a trauma history that you're dealing with? Is it a high level of stress or a low level of stress resilience? Do you have a chronic illness that is there? What about your food choices, being able to cook for yourself, things like that? What are your barriers to wellness? And just sort of reflect on that a little bit. And the reason I ask that question is because I see neurofeedback, and this very basic question, what is neurofeedback? I see it as a barrier eliminator. Or minimizer might be a better way to describe it. It doesn't cure any diagnosis, but it seems to help people live with whatever diagnosis they have better. So they might feel better focus, better energy, more happiness or joy, motivation. One of the things that I noticed with myself along the way, which I was fascinated by, was when I would start to have a deep desire for X. So the first time that I experienced that myself was a deep desire to be outside. I'd never had that before, but it was a deep longing. With my chronic illness, being outside, being in the heat, being physically active was very tricky. And so I was very afraid of it, but this longing sort of took over. Got me outside. I'm now an avid hiker and backpacker. And that's a life change right there, but I've had that kind of thing. So in that way, I call it a barrier eliminator. Probably the most important thing to understand about neurofeedback, about what it is learning. It is a learning process for your brain. If you think about your life, you are always learning. A toddler, it learns to walk, right? A child in school learns how to do math. We learn how to be polite, whatever. But this takes it to the level of the brain. So it's a different kind of learning for the brain, but it's a learning process. So it's a natural process. Some metaphors people use are it's defragging your hard drive, cleaning up and clearing out a barrier eliminator. And this quote actually, to me, really describes it. In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer. Neurofeedback taps into your innate intelligence, the innate design of the brain to make you better. It's an incredibly empowering experience, particularly using NeurOptimal, which is the equipment that we use, because in NeurOptimal, the brain is deciding. Your brain is deciding how to make you better. And that's pretty exciting and pretty empowering. So what neurofeedback is not, all right? It is not voodoo. And to that point, we're actually going to talk about the history of neurofeedback today, how it was discovered. And when you begin to hear the science behind this, you begin to see this is the real deal. This isn't magic, although for some people it feels magical. It's not treatment. And again, this is particularly the way we do neurofeedback. We're not trying to treat any kind of an illness or diagnosis. What we're doing is brain optimization. We take a suboptimal brain and optimize it. And there's a whole cascade of things that occurs regardless of diagnosis. With neurofeedback, there are no chemicals. I think there's risk in anything you do in life, but I think risk with neurofeedback is exceedingly low. Again, it's a learning process. It's not treatment. We're not creating side effects. Again, with linear or nonlinear neurofeedback. It's not electroshock therapy. So a lot of people will ask me this question about when you have the sensors on the head, is there electricity or a signal being put into the brain? There is not. The only reason those sensors are on the brain or on the scalp is to read the cortical activity and plug that into the equipment. It is not hypnosis. That's a very different process. It is non-invasive, especially when the brain is deciding. And it's not meditation or computer-assisted meditation. Again, it's a very different process from meditation. The brain is actually learning about its own inefficiencies and improving. So we'll go into now the history of neurofeedback. This is Barry Sterman, still living. He was a researcher at UCLA. I believe he is still at UCLA, but a meticulous researcher and very well respected. And what he was looking at back in the mid-1960s was, everybody's heard of the Pavlovian dogs, right? Pavlov's dogs. It was training dogs essentially to have a response, right? And so whenever the bell went off, there would be a there'd be a salivating response to it's time to eat, right? So they made that association. That's a learning process. Well, Sterman wanted to do this while measuring or looking at the EEG. So meaning brainwaves. What was happening in the brains he actually had cats as his subjects while they were learning. So his first experiment was he had about 30 cats, and they were in cages without access to food, not starved, but they were hungry. Taken out one at a time and brought to an empty room. And actually I have a little picture of that. Brought to an empty room where there was nothing but a bowl and a lever. And you can see the wires there down connecting to the scalp of the kitties. Whenever the cats learn very quickly, whenever they press the lever, they get food, okay? So he's monitoring the EEG all the while. He varies the experiment next. So the cats learn to do that. I think I said that. I don't know if I said it out loud. They learned how to do that very quickly. He varies the experiment where he adds a tonal sound such that when the sound was playing, if the cats pressed the lever, there would be no food. So the cats would have to wait until the sound stopped, and then they could press the lever and get food. But what Sterman noticed in this part of the experiment was the EEG. So the cats looked very still, just kind of sitting there. But what he noticed with the EEG is that they were highly alert. And what we know now is that is a particular brain state. It's an ultra-stable brain state. And if you think of like an athlete who is in the zone, and they're calm, they're focused, they have perspective, they're ready to go, right? That's the brain state that we now know these cats were in. So waiting for their food. Again, very quickly they learned just hang out until that tone stopped and then they could get their food. So Sterman began to wonder if the cats could produce this brain state at will. So he varied the experiment again, he altered it again, where no lever, no tonal sound, but when the cats produced that brain state for half a second, they would get food. And so what do you think happened? Very quickly, they learned to produce this brain state to get food. So these cats then developed ultra-stable brains for this research. So this is pretty exciting. It was published. It was replicated. But what do we do with it? We don't know, right? So a few years later, you can see in the top left there, there's the NASA logo. Sterman was approached by NASA. He had a bit of a reputation as a really good researcher. NASA's having difficulty with astronauts, with hallucinations essentially were happening, and they had to understand what was happening neurologically. They suspected rocket fuel, and they needed to understand it. So Sterman had took some cats, and he had to expose them to rocket fuel, and he noted the predictable neurological decline. Fatigue, weakness, hallucinations, seizures, and death. And this occurred, this neurological decline, in all but 9 of the cats in the study. And Sterman realized that these cats, these 9 cats from his previous study, were from his previous study. So these were cats who had ultra-stable brains that had a higher resilience to the rocket fuel, a higher neurological stability. So this was profound, and was quickly applied to humans. I believe he had an administrative assistant who had epilepsy. I think the first study was about 10 subjects with epilepsy, and they, again, in this very first study, were able to reduce grand mal seizures by 65%. I read in the study that some of the subjects' seizures went away entirely. So as far as I understand, NASA to this day has their astronauts do neurofeedback training for this reason. So one thing I would say is neurofeedback got associated with voodoo in part because they didn't understand why this happened. The thinking about the brain at the time just didn't fit. They had no idea of just how plastic the brain is, just how adaptable the brain is, how much it can still learn later in life, and other things. But so the neurosciences have actually been catching up to neurofeedback, and I think that's why so many more people, that's one of the reasons so many more people are hearing about it. So neurofeedback has come a long way since the 1960s. We got the crank, the manual, and the automatic. And we talk in this group, I've done a few different presentations on linear versus nonlinear neurofeedback. So linear neurofeedback would be manual, nonlinear neurofeedback would be automatic. So with the technology advancing as it has, we can just get so much more data. So, like in Sterman's study, they would be measuring the EEG, and if the person was in this particular brain state, they would get a green light. And if they were out of that particular brain state, they would get a red light. So very basic kind of stuff. And we've advanced to video games and lots of other things. So we'll talk briefly about the 2 kinds of neurofeedback really that are in play today. There's the linear and the nonlinear. So linear neurofeedback generally starts with a brain map. They get a snapshot in time of what's happening in the brain. And it really is dependent on, did that person get a good night's sleep? Did that person eat well? And those are oftentimes instructions that they are given. Try to have it be a low-stress day because they're trying to get a baseline. That's not always possible. But they do start with a brain map. From that, they develop a diagnosis and a protocol. So linear neurofeedback is protocol-based neurofeedback, and it is heavily dependent on your practitioner. So if you're going the linear neurofeedback route, you want to get a practitioner that is intuitive, they've done their research, they've had a lot of experience, and they're paying attention. They can't just set you up with a protocol and leave you in a room. Although a lot of folks do that, I would suggest that you want to find somebody who's going to be really there with you. One of the reasons for that is that with linear neurofeedback, the expert is making the decision about what the brain needs more or less of, and they can create side effects. So for example, a protocol to help anxiety can get you into depression. A protocol to help depression can get you into anxiety, headaches, things like that. So they need to be making adjustments and so forth, and really checking in with you. With nonlinear neurofeedback, it is not practitioner-based. It is based on you and your brain. So instead of the brain map, they do something called dynamic thresholding. Dynamic thresholding is they're getting 4 measurements, or the equipment is getting 4 measurements of the cortical activity 256 times a second in every session. So it's looking much more closely, much more robustly at how the brain is moving. I believe this approach is more in line with how the brain works. If you think of the brain as a river, right? It's never the same river. It's always in motion. And so you want to try to approximate that. What's happening there? Where are the inefficiencies in the processes of the brain? And also it has the advantage, I'll add, I guess, that with linear neurofeedback, they do try to treat, for example, ADHD. And so they say you need more. I'm going to make this up because that's not the approach I take. Let's say you need more alpha. So they're going to uptrain alpha, right? But when you do something in the body, you're going to impact other parts of the body, right? So that's how side effects come about. But I was thinking more, sometimes you need more alpha. Sometimes you need more beta. Sometimes you need less theta. What nonlinear neurofeedback works on is more how the brain is deciding what it needs at different times. You can see a kid, let's say, who has ADHD, just get hyper-focused, and they can't move off of that focus. So with nonlinear, we work on resilience and flexibility, being able to stick to something that you need to stick to, like sleep, for example, or being able to be more flexible, come off of the focus on that video game or whatever the person might be focusing on, and have that ability to shift and move. So I said earlier that it's a learning process. With the nonlinear neurofeedback, I will say that what we're doing is tapping into the central nervous system and what it is designed to do. It has 2 purposes. 1, to detect difference, and 2, to address that difference. So, for example, the temperature changes in a room. Your central nervous system is monitoring that and adjusting the body physiologically to adapt. You get a scratch on your leg. The central nervous system experiences that as a change. It's a difference, and it works to address it. Okay? And I'll say when the temperature changes in the room, if it changes 1 degree, it's probably not going to do a whole lot to adjust, right? You're fine. But if it changes by 20 degrees, it's going to start adjusting. So with neurofeedback, with nonlinear, what's happening is we're measuring when a difference happens. We call it turbulence, we call it shift, we call it a surge in cortical activity. You can call it all kinds of things. But what it's tapping into is, or showing the brain, is a difference. And then it decides whether to address it. That's how a toddler learns to walk, right? This constant monitoring for change. And a toddler learns to walk, and they do that on their own. And so with nonlinear neurofeedback, we're tapping into that. We don't have to teach the brain anything. It will learn once we give it the information. Let's see. So I've been talking about the nonlinear neurofeedback. A NeurOptimal session, and most linear sessions, as I understand it, are about a half an hour. You can do it various ways. You can do, intensives. I've heard of people doing linear neurofeedback, for several hours a day, for a week. They fly into Denver or they fly in somewhere and they do this very intensive program. Let's see. With NeurOptimal, I've heard of people doing that where they do many sessions in a day or in a weekend. Or you can just do once a day. If you're going to an office, maybe you go there once or twice a week. All of this is fine. It's based on you, your need, your budget, how quickly you want to go, that kind of thing. So session's about 30 minutes. You can see with this little guy here, he's got 2 sensors on his scalp, 2 on his right ear and 1 on his left ear. That's a NeurOptimal session. And again, 30 minutes, he's listening to music. Kids can also watch movies. And that's all they have to do. With linear neurofeedback, most of the time they're watching a movie or they're playing a video game. And when their brain gets out of the state that the practitioner believes they should be in, then they lose sound, they lose the color on the screen, that kind of thing. And that alerts the child or the adult to get their brain back into the state that they believe is important for them to be in. Results with neurofeedback are prolonged and progressive. I have heard so many folks say, if you do these sessions with neurofeedback, or they've been told, it's permanent. You will never have to do neurofeedback again. I do not see that. I have people contacting me who have done linear neurofeedback, who need a touch-up, who need to move in another direction, whatever. So I see it as something that you continue, meaning it's like exercise for your brain. It's like going to the gym. You want to keep up with it, and that varies for different people. So that, I have lots of folks who will rent the equipment once a year. Some people buy the equipment and do it all the time. That would be, I'm in that category. Let's see, my daughter had, those 10 sessions. She probably needed 10 to 20 through the year. Then she had 10 more the following summer. Now she's doing it pretty regularly. It just varies, with so many things: genetics, diet, stress, what's going on in your life. But they are prolonged and progressive results. I do not believe that they are permanent. I mean, I guess they technically call them semi-permanent. Your brain doesn't forget, but these other brain pathways can sort of take over again and become dominant again. So, I think keeping it up is important as you make life changes to solidify. I do have several testimonials here. I'll just skip through those. You can find those on my website. Who is it for? Who's neurofeedback for? I say if you have a brain, it's for you. And I actually have clients who say, I didn't have any diagnoses, but man, do I feel great after doing this. And we have athletes, business leaders, but parents, when we're dealing with different learning struggles, students, we get a surge in requests around April, May, when everybody's taking exams and so forth. Occupational therapy, physical therapists. I mean, I could go on. I'm a couples therapist, and I use it a lot with couples that I work with. So if you have a brain, yeah, it's useful. All right, so I'm going to try to flip back over to find, and see if I can figure out if there are any questions, but I don't know where to get back to eCam. There I am. Okay. Okay, so I don't see questions right now. Let me check and see if any came through. Okay, I don't see any questions, but please feel free to throw some in. Start a watch party if you want to watch this, and then also, you can find it in the units. I hope this was helpful today, and yeah, I'll see you again soon. Bye.